The neighborhood looked perfect from the outside rows of manicured lawns, trimmed hedges, and houses painted in shades of beige so uniform they seemed cloned. But beneath that surface something darker was stirring. It began as most storms do, with a whisper and accusation so outrageous it seemed impossible. A mother, blindsided by the very community meant to protect her family. A daughter, targeted with lies so cruel they threatened her future. And an HOA president who believed she was untouchable, but she didn't know the truth, because the one person standing between her and total control wasn't just another neighbor. He wasn't another homeowner cowed into silence. He was a judge. And the moment she came for his daughter, she had unknowingly walked into her own trial. This is the story of how power can corrupt even the smallest corners of life, and how far a parent will go when their child is dragged into the crosshairs. What happened in Willow Creek wasn't just petty neighbor drama, it was a war. And the scars it left behind are a reminder of just how thin the line between order and chaos really is. But before the battle began, before the lies and hearings and courtroom revelations, there was peace. A fragile kind of peace, but peace all the same. And in that calm, the first cracks of the storm began to show. Willow Creek was the kind of neighborhood realtors love to brag about. The kind where parents walked their dogs at dawn, waving to each other with coffee mugs in hand, where children rode bikes in circles around cul-de-sacs, their laughter echoing against garage doors, where block parties filled the streets every summer with barbecue smoke and folding, tables stacked with potluck dishes. My family had lived there for years. To us, it was more than just property values and curb appeal. It was home. My daughter, Emily, had grown up under the shade of its oak trees. She had learned to ride her bike on its smooth sidewalks, graduated high school, while our neighbors lined the street with balloons, and was now stepping into adulthood with all the optimism of someone who believed the world was still on her side. She was the kind of young woman you couldn't help but be proud of. Smart, driven, kind to a fault. She worked part-time, studied late into the night, and still found time to help our elderly neighbors with groceries or shovel snow from their driveways. She had plans and ambitions that stretched far beyond the cul-de-sacs and HOA bylaws of Willow Creek, and that's what made what happened next so unbearable, because Emily's world, so carefully built on kindness and hard work, was about to be dismantled by someone who didn't see her as a neighbor or even as a person. To Evelyn Sharp, the HOA president who had ruled over Willow Creek for more than a decade, Emily was nothing more than an obstacle. And obstacles in Evelyn's world were meant to be removed. At first, though, Evelyn seemed harmless. She had that practiced smile of someone who believed herself to be the glue holding the community together. Always with her clipboard in hand. Always checking mailboxes, always circling slowly in her SUV as if patrolling the streets. To new residents, she was simply the woman who cared too much. To longtime homeowners, she was the enforcer, unyielding, unchallenged, and unrelenting. The HOA board, though technically a group of elected volunteers, might as well have been Evelyn's personal court. She controlled the agenda, controlled the votes, and controlled the narrative. For years, people tolerated it. After all, it was easier to pay the occasional fine for leaving trash bins out too long than to fight the woman who seemed to thrive on conflict. But the thing about unchecked power is that it doesn't stop where it should. It grows, creeping, further into lives it has no business touching. And in Evelyn's eyes, our family was ripe for the taking. It started small letters slipped into our mailbox, citing minor violations. A garden hose left coiled near the side of the house. Emily's car parked slightly too far from the curb. A patch of grass that looked, in her eyes, a shade too brown. Each notice came with a fine, and each fine came with a threat of escalation. At first, we shrugged them off, assuming they were little more than nuisances. After all, everyone in? Willow Creek had stories of Evelyn's nitpicking, but then the notices began to shift. They no longer targeted the property. They targeted Emily. The first claimed she was driving recklessly through the neighborhood, endangering children. The second accused her of hosting late-night parties, disturbing the peace. The third alleged she was vandalizing community property, all untrue. All fabricated, and yet Evelyn wrote them as if they were fact, stamping them with the official seal of the HOA, sending them not just to us but to the entire board. She began to shape a narrative, carefully planting seeds in the minds of neighbors who once smiled at Emily when she walked past. Suddenly, those smiles faltered. Conversations stopped when she entered a room. Whispers followed her down sidewalks. She once rode her bike on without fear. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. For Emily, it was bewildering. For us, it was infuriating. And for Evelyn, it was only the beginning, because once she realized she could manipulate perception with ease, she decided to escalate. She no longer wanted to fine us. She wanted to destroy us. And she had just begun. Writing the story that would almost succeed, Evelyn Sharp's campaign against Emily didn't stop with letters or whispers. It evolved, growing bolder, sharper, more dangerous. If her early moves had been small cracks in our peace, now she was swinging a hammer, determined to bring the entire house crashing down. It began with surveillance. Emily noticed it first. Evelyn's SUV parked just a little too long across the street when she left for class in the morning, the headlights lingering behind her on her drive home. The way Evelyn always seemed to appear, clipboard in hand, whenever Emily stepped outside. At first, Emily brushed it off as paranoia. But then one night she spotted Evelyn crouched near our mailbox, snapping pictures with her phone. By the time Emily rushed inside to tell me, Evelyn was already gone. The photos began circulating soon after. Neighbors whispered about evidence of Emily's recklessness, grainy snapshots of her car parked crookedly, of her walking home from work at dusk, of her sitting on the front porch scrolling through her phone. Harmless, ordinary moments, twisted into accusations of loitering, trespassing, and harassment, and Evelyn didn't stop at spreading rumors. She weaponized the HOS authority, stacking violation notices so high it was as if she wanted to bury us in paperwork. One fine turned into five into 10. Each carried the same threat. Continued non-compliance would result in a formal hearing before the board, a hearing for Emily, who had never even received a speeding ticket. The idea was terrifying. For me, it was insulting. But for Evelyn, it was the first step toward what she truly wanted: control. The board meeting was set for a Thursday evening. By then, Evelyn had already poisoned the well. Flyers appeared on doorsteps warning of unsafe activity. Linked to Emily, parents suddenly forbade their children from visiting our home. And by the time we walked into the community clubhouse for the hearing, it felt like walking into enemy territory. The room buzzed with tension. Neighbors we'd shared meals with avoided our eyes. Evelyn sat at the head of the long oak table, flanked by board members who looked less like volunteers and more like jurors she'd handpicked. The walls seemed to close in as she began her tirade, rattling off alleged violations with the ease of someone reciting a grocery list: unsafe driving, noise disturbances, property damage. Each accusation was followed by photographs, notes, and testimonies from neighbors who had clearly been influenced by Evelyn's narrative. None of it was substantial, none of it was real. But the performance was convincing enough to cast a shadow of doubt. Emily sat frozen, her hands clenched in her lap. I could see the redness creeping into her cheeks, the shame of being accused so publicly of being painted as someone she wasn't. She looked small in that chair, and for the first time in years, I saw fear in her eyes. That was when I realized Evelyn's true weapon wasn't the HOA charter or the threat of fines. It was humiliation. She wanted to break Emily's spirit in front of the very community that had once celebrated her achievements. She wanted to brand her as an outcast. The board, cowed by Evelyn's dominance, voted unanimously for probation. Official warning placed on our record, with the threat of harsher penalties if infractions continued. Evelyn's lips curled into a satisfied smile as she adjourned the meeting, and the neighbors filtered out with whispers and sidelong glances. But for Evelyn, it wasn't enough. Humiliation was only step one. Step two was annihilation. The weeks that followed were suffocating. Evelyn escalated every minor detail into a criminal offense. A single misplaced trash bag turned into an environmental hazard. A late-night pizza delivery to our house became suspicious activity. Emily's car, parked in front of our own driveway, was photographed and reported as an abandoned vehicle. But the breaking point came one Saturday afternoon. Emily had been volunteering at the local shelter that morning. When she returned, exhausted but smiling, she decided to relax on the porch with a glass of iced tea. Barely 10 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled slowly down our street, its lights flashing silently before stopping at our curb. 2 officers stepped out. The neighbors watched from their lawns, whispering, pointing. Emily froze as the officers approached. One of them asked her name, the other pulled out a clipboard. Evelyn, of course, stood a few houses down, phone in hand, recording the entire interaction with the smug satisfaction of someone who believed she had orchestrated the perfect downfall. The officers explained that they had received a report of trespassing and potential theft in the neighborhood. Emily, stunned, tried to explain she lived there, pointing to our house. The officers, professional but clearly uncomfortable, asked for ID. She complied, her hands trembling as she handed it over. After a few tense minutes, they apologized, explaining there had clearly been a misunderstanding, but the damage was already done. The neighbors had seen it. The rumors would spread like wildfire. Emily questioned by police. Suspected of theft, under scrutiny. When the cruiser finally pulled away, Evelyn was still filming, and she was smiling. That night, Emily broke down in tears. She said she felt trapped in her own home, like every move she made was being watched, twisted, and used against her. She spoke of leaving, of packing her bags and moving somewhere far away just to escape. Evelyn's reached. It was then I knew we couldn't wait for Evelyn to stop. She never would. She wouldn't be satisfied until Emily was destroyed, and so I began to prepare. I gathered every letter, every notice, every fabricated violation. I documented the harassment, the lies, the manipulation of board meetings. Piece by piece, I built a case, not just as a father, but as the one thing Evelyn had never expected to face, a judge. But Evelyn wasn't finished escalating. Not by a long shot, because in her mind, Emily wasn't just a nuisance. She was a criminal. And Evelyn was about to take her obsession to the final level, petitioning for Emily's arrest. The day I received notice of Evelyn's formal complaint with the local authorities, alleging Emily had vandalized HOA property, my blood ran cold. The evidence was a blurry video of a figure spray painting a wall late at night. The figure was unidentifiable, yet Evelyn swore it was Emily. She pushed the narrative so aggressively that the HOA backed her claim, signing their names to a formal request for prosecution. It wasn't just harassment anymore. It was war, and Evelyn thought she had already won, but she hadn't realized what storm she had unleashed, or that the courtroom she was dragging my daughter into was one I controlled. Asterisk. The formal complaint hit like a thunderclap. Evelyn Sharp, emboldened by months of manipulation, finally went for the jugular. An official request that my daughter, Emily, be arrested for property damage and vandalism. The evidence: a grainy night vision video of a hooded figure spraying graffiti on a wall near the clubhouse. Nothing about the video identified Emily, but Evelyn's voice carried weight in the HOA. And by then she had carefully cultivated an atmosphere where doubt itself was poison. Neighbors whispered in driveways. Children avoided Emily as though she were contagious. Flyers appeared, slipped under doors and pinned to bulletin boards. Is your family safe with vandals living next door? The smear campaign had reached its apex, but Evelyn had made one miscalculation, one fatal mistake. She had assumed she was dragging Emily before a sympathetic judge, one who would rubber stamp her vendetta. She didn't know that the case would land directly in my courtroom. The day I received the file, my pulse thudded in my ears. There it was, Evelyn's sworn affidavit, dripping with venom, declaring my daughter guilty without evidence. It was personal now, not just harassment. Not just fines. Evelyn wanted to see Emily in handcuffs, marched away in front of the entire neighborhood, and that was something I could never allow. The hearing date was set. By the time it arrived, tension in the neighborhood had reached a fever pitch. Cars, lined the street outside the courthouse. Reporters from the local paper had caught wind of the case, sensing drama in a quiet suburban community where nothing like this was supposed to happen. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere crackled. On one side sat Evelyn, perfectly composed, draped in her signature business suit, a self-righteous gleam in her eye. Around her clustered her loyalists from the HOA board, whispering encouragement. Feeding her confidence. On the other side, Emily sat beside me, pale but resolute. Though I could not preside over my own daughter's case, I had ensured that it would be heard before a fair bench, one of my most trusted colleagues, Judge Ramirez. My role was not on the stand, but in the shadows, guiding, preparing, ensuring. Truth would slice through Evelyn's lies like a blade. The bailiff called the room to order, and Evelyn took the floor. Her speech was polished, practiced. She described Emily as a menace, a lawbreaker, a danger to the integrity of the community. She held up photographs, still frames from her dubious video, insisting they showed Emily's distinct silhouette. She waved stacks of fabricated violation notices as though they were gospel. Her voice rang with false conviction, each word sharpened into a weapon. For a moment, even I felt the sway of her performance. That was Evelyn's power, her ability to twist perception until truth bent under the weight of her lies. But then came our turn. Our defense wasn't fiery. It didn't need to be. It was steady, methodical, devastating. Witnesses testified that Emily had been volunteering at the shelter, the night of the alleged vandalism, hours away from the scene. Time-stamped security footage from the shelter confirmed it. Character witnesses spoke of her kindness, her dedication, her spotless record. And then the piece de resistance, a digital forensic expert who dismantled Evelyn's video frame by frame, exposing its inconsistencies, revealing it had been doctored, manipulated to implicate Emily. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Evelyn's confident mask faltered. Judge Ramirez leaned forward, her expression hard. "Mrs. Sharp," she said slowly, "are you aware that submitting falsified evidence is itself a serious offense?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Evelyn stammered, insisting she had only presented what was given to her, that she had acted in good faith, but the cracks were widening. Her credibility, once ironclad in the neighborhood, was crumbling under the weight of exposure. Then came the final blow. I stepped forward, not as Emily's father, but as a sworn officer of the court. With deliberate precision, I laid out Evelyn's months of harassment, the false reports, the misuse of HOA authority. I presented a meticulously compiled dossier, each page a nail in the coffin of her reputation, and as the evidence stacked higher and higher, Evelyn's composure dissolved. Her smug smile twisted into outrage, then panic. She interrupted, shouted, tried to regain control, but the gavel silenced her. By the time Judge Ramirez rendered her decision, the room was electric. The complaint against Emily? Dismissed with prejudice. Evelyn's evidence? Declared fraudulent, and Evelyn herself? Referred for investigation into perjury, harassment, and abuse of power. The neighbors who once whispered in her favor now sat in stunned silence, realizing the queen they had followed was nothing more than a pretender draped in lies. Emily exhaled, tears streaking her cheeks, not of defeat, but of release. But the story wasn't over, because as Evelyn rose from her chair, trembling with rage, she hissed a final promise across the room, her voice low but venomous enough to chill the air. "This isn't finished." And in that moment, every hair on my neck stood on end, for while Evelyn's empire had collapsed in the courtroom, her obsession was not so easily buried. The real question wasn't whether we had won. It was what Evelyn, stripped of her authority and desperate to reclaim control, might do next. And that question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered, as the gavel fell and the world held its breath. The gavel's echo faded, but its reverberations lingered like a storm cloud hanging over the neighborhood. Evelyn Sharp had been exposed, her empire of lies dismantled, but victory in the courtroom was only the beginning. The true resolution unfolded not in legal documents or verdicts, but in the quiet aftermath, the ripples of consequence that spread through every corner of the community. In the days that followed, the neighborhood buzzed with rumors. Some claimed Evelyn had been seen storming from the courthouse in tears, clutching her briefcase as if it were a shield against the truth. Others whispered she was already lawyering up, determined to salvage her reputation. But for the first time, those whispers weren't tinged with reverence. They were laced with fear and contempt. The HOA board, once her loyal army, began to splinter. Without Evelyn's iron grip to hold them together, petty grievances resurfaced. Meetings devolved into chaos. Neighbors who had once nodded along with Evelyn's dictates now raised their voices, demanding accountability, demanding answers, and for Emily, the shift was almost surreal. The same people who had averted their eyes now approached her tentatively, murmuring apologies, offering awkward smiles. It wasn't forgiveness she needed, it was freedom. And at last, she had it. Yet beneath the relief, I felt a deeper unease. Evelyn's parting words, "This isn't finished," echoed like a curse. I had seen that look in her eyes, the wild, desperate glint of someone who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. Those were the most dangerous kind of adversaries. Weeks turned into months. The investigation into Evelyn's conduct gathered steam. Subpoenas were issued, auditors dug into the HOA's finances, and slowly, the full picture emerged. Years of misused funds, fabricated violations, intimidation, tactics, and backroom deals. Evelyn had run the HOA like her personal fiefdom, and now every skeleton she had buried was being unearthed. She was forced to resign as HOA president, her name dragged through the mud in public hearings. Former allies abandoned her, scrambling to save their own reputations. She fought, of course filing motions, penning angry letters to the editor, painting herself as the victim of a witch hunt. But the more she flailed, the more isolated she became. And eventually silence. Her house, once the grand centerpiece of the cul-de-sac, went dark. Curtains drawn, for sale sign hammered into the lawn, the sharp residence became a monument to hubris. When the moving trucks finally arrived, neighbors gathered at their windows, watching as Evelyn's empire was dismantled box by box, loaded onto the back of a truck bound for nowhere. For Emily, life slowly returned to normal. She finished high school, her spirit intact but tempered by the ordeal. The scholarship applications she had once hesitated to send out now carried an unspoken weight, proof that she had survived something few her age could imagine. And when the acceptance letters arrived, she read them with tears in her eyes, knowing she had earned not just opportunity but vindication. As her father, I carried my own lessons. Justice, I knew, was rarely swift and never simple. It required patience, persistence, and above all, faith. I had spent my career wielding the law like a scalpel, precise and deliberate. But when it was my own family under attack, I learned the hardest truth of all. Justice is not abstract. It is personal. The neighborhood, too, was forever changed. With Evelyn gone, the HOA underwent a transformation. New leadership rose, neighbors who valued fairness over control, cooperation over intimidation. Rules were still enforced, but with reason, not malice. Community events returned, laughter echoing down streets that had once been silent under Evelyn's reign. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like a neighborhood again, not a prison guarded by clipboards and fines. Yet even in that renewal, Evelyn's shadow lingered. Her name became a cautionary tale whispered at block parties and board meetings. "Don't pull on Evelyn," neighbors joked when disputes arose. But beneath the humor was a reminder: power, unchecked, corrupts. And even the smallest cul-de-sac can hide battles as fierce as any courtroom drama. One evening, long after the dust had settled, I found myself standing in the driveway, watching the sunset bleed across the horizon. Emily sat on the porch steps, acceptance letter in her lap, her face lit by the glow of possibility. "I can't believe it's finally over," she said softly. I wanted to tell her yes, that the chapter was closed, that Evelyn was gone, that we could breathe again. But I hesitated, because the truth was, villains don't always disappear when the credits roll. Sometimes they linger in the shadows, waiting for another chance to strike, and Evelyn had left me with a promise: this isn't finished. Maybe it was bluster. Maybe it was the last gasp of a fallen tyrant. But maybe, just maybe, it was something more. That uncertainty kept me vigilant, not fearful, but prepared, because I had seen what unchecked power could do, how lies could spread, how quickly trust could erode. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty: if Evelyn or anyone like her ever tried to rise again, I would be ready. In the end, our story wasn't just about one woman's obsession or one family's defense. It was about resilience, about standing firm when the ground shakes beneath you, about refusing to be defined by someone else's lies. It was about the strength of a daughter who never gave in, and a father who learned that justice isn't just something you deliver from the bench. It's something you fight for at home. And it was about a neighborhood that discovered the truth the hard way. That power is not in the hands of those who shout the loudest or intimidate the fiercest, but in the collective will of ordinary people to say enough. So, as you hear this story, I'll leave you with a question. What would you do if the very system meant to protect your home, your family, your peace, turned against you? Would you bow your head, hoping to weather the storm unnoticed? Or would you rise, no matter the cost, and face it head on? Because in the end, the real battle isn't against the HOA, or even against a Karen like Evelyn. The real battle is against fear itself. And when fear is defeated, freedom follows.
This was just one story, but the next one will be even more dramatic. Are you ready? Then you need to subscribe to HOA Stories 87 right now. Like this video, share it with your friends, and hit the bell because the next story might sound a little too close to home.